Hello YouTube, this is Fortnite Fails JJ from channel JJ coming back to you with another video. And in this one, this is from TBA's channel, The Black Authority. You can go to this channel and watch it if you want. I'll link it or put it in one of the cards in this video. But this is The Black Authority going to war with all the geek gamer comic book writers or comic book reviewers in the space. This is actually... Stuff like this is why I actually unsubscribed from them, because they are really inconsistent and it's whatever they want at the time. So give me your thoughts, and I'll, if I feel like responding or if I feel like it should be responded to, I'll might make a video about it. We'll see.
You've noticed this more recently with the 007 movies. Now, what they did after some confusion, they cleared it up. And in the 007 movies with Daniel Craig, they said that now they want to expand the 007 moniker. People were saying they were going to make a black James Bond. They clarified it to say, well, actually, what we're looking at is expanding 007 to say that anyone can be 007. And that in the new movie, they want to have Daniel Craig alongside a black female. I think it was in Captain Marvel movie, actually, I believe, and that she would be a 007 also. So what they're looking at doing is franchising out, and that actually makes good sense when you think about it. Right now, the 007 movies, the James Bond films, have really been held captive to whoever is the one male, one guy, one person that they put cast as, quote, James Bond. So whenever that guy decides he doesn't want to do the movies anymore, they have to begin this tedious, arduous process of selecting, quote, the new James Bond. So now you've got to get a franchise player all over again. Movie studios want to get away from being held captive by stars like that. Now, you may think that's a good thing. You may think that's a bad thing when it comes to guys like Hugh Jackman, who people just say that's definitively Wolverine. Problem: Hugh Jackman doesn't want to play Wolverine anymore. So does that mean that no Wolverine can no longer show up on film because Hugh Jackman no longer wants to play him? No. When Sean Connery decided he didn't want to play 007 anymore, they moved on. They moved on when Sean Connery didn't want to do it anymore. Yeah, you had George Lazenby and whatnot, but the point was they were showing Sean Connery's not going to decide whether this continues or not. And there were some people who liked it, there were other people who didn't. But that is what they were proving was, hey, we're not going to stop doing this because Sean Connery doesn't want to do it. Remember the caterwauling when they cast Daniel Craig, a blonde James Bond. There was a lot of controversy about that. James Bond has dark hair. He's got black hair. How dare you change that? James Bond has dark hair. A blonde James Bond. This is bull crap. We won't stand for it. Now, it's one thing when people want to sit up and talk about cosmetic changes as far as hair. It's another thing when they start talking about race. Because then you see that these people have a thread of race that runs through everything. And that's where you are with this. So when they started talking about putting a black female in the movie as a 007 agent, to say that 007 is a classification that isn't just tied to one person. It isn't tied to James Bond, that they've got a lot of people who have the 007 classification. They can be male, they can be female, they can be black, they can be white, they can be anyone. Now remember what James Bond is supposed to be. James Bond is supposed to be a spy. There are a lot of ways you can be a spy. There have been a lot of females who are spies in history. This idea that the only way to be a spy is to be a debonair white dude who's able to seduce the ladies. Well, women have been seducing men far longer throughout history and have made better spies in a lot of situations. It's not about who can throw the best drop kick or who can toss someone off of a train or whatnot like that. That doesn't have to be the soul of it. And furthermore, films should evolve and should look at different ways of expressing themselves. They shouldn't be pigeonholed. But if you are looking to keep the world at a specific world view and a specific perspective, particularly focused on lionizing white males to the exclusion of everyone else, then you need the world to stay frame frozen. You need the world to freeze in place, which is what they're demanding. So you saw these guys going around and they were doing these racist thumbnails saying, "Yes, queen." These aren't white guys who deal with black women. These are white guys appropriating those terms with racial mocking. And of course, YouTube has allowed that to stay up there. This is white. That's how racism works. Understand that. That's how racism works. It'd be different if these were guys who had some type of connection to the black community or something like that. It would be different if that was the case. But no, this is pure white supremacy. And when they do that "Yas Queen," that's that 4chan, alt-right, Richard Spencer type of bigotry. That code speak. That you hear black folks saying it. So it's the N-word for them. Which is the whole point. The idea that you're going to expand 007 so you can franchise it, which is like you take a look at the Fast and Furious movies. They're trying to franchise that out now with different characters so that they're not beholden to just one individual. So with 007, if you can have a string of 007 movies or 2 or 3 007 franchises with different characters or different people in the role of 007, not necessarily the role of James Bond, not gender swapping James Bond, but in the role of 007. These guys don't want that either. Now, they will tell you that the issue was gender swapping James Bond or race swapping James Bond. And even after that was suggested that no, that's not correct. It's that 007 is a classification. No, we don't want that either. Why do you have to take that away from the white guy? He built James Bond. You can't do that either. You can't do that. In other words, the only 007 you can ever have is a white male, and that they see this as intellectual real estate. It didn't become a racial issue until these fragile egos of these white nationalist nerds felt threatened by competition. Because imagine if you did put out a 007 with a non-white male that made more money than the ones with Daniel Craig and Sean Connery. Imagine if that occurred. What do you say then? How do you say it's wrong? How do you argue against it? Answer, you don't. So what they're demanding is that you kill this baby in its crib. That there shouldn't even be the suggestion of branching off in this way. You can't do that. Remember, white supremacists hate competition. That's the way racism works. You kill the competition and tell everybody you only have one choice. Which ironically is what these guys claim everybody else does to them. Remember, white supremacy is based on projection. And these media nerds are some of the most dangerous white supremacists out there. Now back to the Dave Chappelle special. You'll also notice that none of these guys were cheering for Dave when Dave said that he didn't believe Michael Jackson's white accusers. None of these guys who were talking about his fearless comedy, they weren't applauding him for that part of his special, saying that he didn't believe the white accusers. They weren't promoting that as freedom of speech and cheering that on. But then again, I guess these guys are still hump hurt about Elvis Presley getting knocked off, so they're going to cheer Dave for the part that they think helps their agenda. But they're not going to cheer Dave on for taking jabs at white society. Now, notice they're not doing that. Not going to have it. Not going to have it at all. Now, when you take a look at what these guys tell you here, the same guys who are claiming that they're cheering for Dave Chappelle, and then you take a look at the stuff that they say. They're racist terms like Yas Queen and SJW and shoehorning, which is something more recent they've decided to invoke, claiming that any black character who shows up anywhere once you surpass the numbers that these guys are comfortable with, or once you touch properties that they consider to be their own, any black presence that is in any way able to compete with the white presences on screen is called shoehorning. In other words, any black people portrayed as equals is shoehorning. So when you hear them say shoehorning, they're saying, wait, you're trying to elevate black characters to our level. Game of Thrones was a particular victim of this. When HBO got the TV rights to Game of Thrones and started putting black characters in it, the white guys these white nationalist nerds got really upset. They were like, hey, don't put too many black folk up in there. And if they're in there, they need to be slaves. Don't try to promote any of them. Don't try to elevate any of them. This is our space. Don't try to do that. Now, what these white nationalist nerds will tell you, or will try to tell you, and by the way, they also have some sycophantic, very, very slave-minded plantation, buck-dancing house Negro that run along behind them. They're their little lackeys and tag-alongs in true massa plantation style. So these guys really think that they're hitting it big. But you'll notice that when they talk about those kinds of things, about shoehorning, you'll notice that they never say that the injection of white characters who were not part of the source material is shoehorning. Because these guys are trying to tell you, no, we just want to keep the source material. And we wanted to stay true to the source material. And they're making changes to alter the source material. That's what they'll tell you. But you'll notice that with TV shows like The Walking Dead, which many people see as a racial allegory, of course, zombie movies are rooted in racial allegory. Zombie movies are rooted in racial allegory. But you notice the TV show The Walking Dead, you notice that none of these white nationalist nerds in any of their videos or reviews are decrying and condemning the fact that the TV show The Walking Dead shoehorned in white male characters that were not a part of the source material. The Walking Dead TV show is based on a comic book series by Robert Kirkman. When AMC got the TV rights, they shoehorned in a major white character, a white character who kicked everybody's butt, Daryl and his brother. Those characters did not exist before the TV show. They were created specifically for the TV show. Specifically. And none of these white males, none of these white nationalist nerds who have all this complaining and gnashing of teeth to do, none of them have ever said, and you know what, AMC, that's messed up of you SJWs at AMC, interjecting white characters that did not exist in the source material. Shame on you. This is destroying the source material. This is destroying the show. This is destroying the character of it. This is destroying the quality of it. Notice they didn't do that. They brought in a white character that did not exist in the comic books, Daryl, and elevated him above everybody. They made him skilled at a supernatural level with no supposed or perceived training. He was just a master huntsman, master sportsman, master archer, master killer, master zombie slayer. These guys loved it. Oh yeah. And he was shoehorned in. But you never voiced a single complaint about that character or any of the other white ones shoehorned in. You're not coming back today to say, I want to give a retrospective on The Walking Dead. And oh yeah, let's talk about how they shoehorned in these how they messed up the series by shoehorning in these white male Mary Sues who could just do anything. You see, if you're black, or even a female, even a white female, they'll claim you're a Mary Sue. You're just being put in for nefarious reasons and can do things that make no sense. But if it's a white male who can do things that make no sense, that's acceptable. No explanation required. No explanation required for how you're able to do all of this, or the fact that even if they wrote it in and said, okay, here's the explanation of why you can do it. If it's a black character, that's called being overrated. You're overrated and overpowered. If it's a black character doing it, you're overrated or overpowered. If you're a female character, you're overrated or overpowered. If you're a white male, then they just want to take a look at the storytelling quality. But how you got your extra power or how you got elevated over everybody else or your skill level, that's never in question. They don't dissect that to say, wait a minute, does that make sense? But that's how racism works. That's the way it works. You remember that movie Wanted with James McAvoy and Angelina Jolie. In the graphic novel series Wanted, Angelina Jolie's character Fox is a black female. But when the movie came out, they changed it to a white woman. These guys ain't had a word to say about it and never will. Not a problem. That wasn't SJW. That wasn't white S social justice warrioring. That didn't bother them at all. But then again, that's how racism works. Total silence, so long as it promotes their agenda. That's what they're about. When you take a look at the Marvel Comics movies, they're doing the same thing over there. They're upset. They're even upset about Blade coming back to black. They're upset about the fact that they have a black person among the Eternals, even though the Eternals were written very clearly to simply say this is a branch of humanity. Africans were the first iteration of humanity anywhere, but these guys want their comic book movies to erase black people. To say that you can have an offshoot of humanity, but they're like, why we gotta have these black folk up here? But that's how racism works. Racism has nothing to do with logic or reason. Racism is about power. Contradiction, logic, irrationality, it's not something that enters the equation. This is about, are you maintaining white power? And that's all. Nothing else matters. Now, these guys got upset about the movie Black Panther. This is a movie that had virtually no white people in it. It took place in Oakland and Africa, and 99% of it was black people. But you knew that was going to be a problem because there was no white savior. As a matter of fact, the black folk were the savior of the white agent. This made these guys furious. Never mind the fact that Black Panther was universally applauded and praised because this was really the first movie where they had a villain who wasn't just, quote, evil for the sake of being evil. He wasn't just Dr. Evil. He had an understandable, comprehensible motive for why he wanted to knock off T'Challa and take his place, and why he wanted to lead his people on a global quest of conquest. It made sense. It made rational sense. But these guys didn't like that either. They didn't like Black Panther either. Even though there was no social justice warrioring, they still didn't like it. They still had a problem. It made over $1 billion at the box office, so you couldn't claim it didn't have an audience. Certainly it had wide appeal. You couldn't make over $1 billion without a good share of white people liking it. These guys had a problem with all of that, and they still do today. They still hate it today because now you have competition. They don't like the fact that T'Challa in the movies is being upheld as probably the best hand-to-hand fighter, even though that's what the comic book said. They don't like that either. So if you're black, you can be a sidekick like James Rhodey is to Iron Man, or like Sam Wilson is to Captain America. That's acceptable. Stay in your place. You be a sidekick. But you attempt to branch outside of that, that's a problem. How dare you be stronger than any of our white characters? And let's be clear, in comic books, this is the way it works. They introduce new characters with new power levels all of the time. All the time. Whether it's the X-Men, you had Scott Summers and his brother, the blonde one, Havoc. And those two were the only Summers brothers for decades. Then they said they had a third brother named Vulcan. And years later, they retconned to say that they had a third brother named Vulcan who had been forgotten about. And that he was more powerful than Scott and Scott's brother Havoc. More powerful than Cyclops and Havoc. This was years later. You didn't hear any of these white nationalist nerds claiming that you're shoehorning in a white male character into the X-Men universe, that this is social justice warrioring. They didn't refer and don't refer to Vulcan or any of the other iterations as Mary Sue's. So what they're saying is you can't be overrated, you can't be overpowered, and you can't be a Mary Sue, and you can't be SJW unless you're non-white. Well, non-white male at least. They haven't presented you a single example of a white male who is SJW, a Mary Sue, or shoehorned into anything. You see, when you think about it in these terms, you realize, oh yeah, it doesn't make sense for them to say that unless you are bigots, because that's the way racism works. What you're saying makes no sense unless your goal is white supremacy. If your goal is to be consistent, then you would acknowledge that new characters with wildly new power levels are introduced all of the time, on top of characters with previously high power levels. This happens all the time. Need more? There's more. Remember Bane from Batman. Now, for those of you who saw The Dark Knight Rises, you love seeing Tom Hardy play Bane. Well, Bane wasn't a long-standing character in the comic books when he was introduced. Bane was a part of that push by DC Comics in the 90s to try to get readership up. They needed a radical new character. Joker was old hat. Riddler, they didn't really know what to do with him. They introduced a brand new character. He had no long-standing legacy. Bane popped up out of nowhere in the comic books. Now, for those of you who don't know, Bane was created as being, when he was created, he was made as being bigger, stronger, and most importantly, smarter than Batman. Smarter than Bruce Wayne. He wasn't some big dumb lug. He was supposed to be basically a criminal mastermind of equal, well, not criminal, because it's a kind of complicated story about how he sees crime. But that basically, he was to be as calculating as Bruce Wayne. He was made to be smart. In many ways, smarter. They've had storylines, and maybe even a current one, I think, that shows him as smarter and doing things that Bruce Wayne was unable to accomplish. Now, if they had created Bane as a black man, if they had created the character of Bane as a black man, out of nowhere brought in a black character who was bigger, stronger, faster, and smarter than Batman, and then showed that character in one issue with no previous meetings between them, in one issue, breaking Batman's back over his knee like a tree branch, they would be screaming and squealing and yowling about that to this very day. How dare you do that? They would consider it a crime against humanity. How dare you? And if you had portrayed it in the movies, they would be absolutely apoplectic. But when it was a white character that they had do it, created out of thin air, no legacy, no training montage, no real explanation except he's taken Venom, this super steroid. It was just accepted, and it's still accepted to this day. No questions asked, no strings attached. That's just it. Everything's perfectly fine in Gotham. No objections. They didn't voice a single objection when it was a white male. But if you portray that as a black character doing this, they would have told you, oh, this is SJW. You're shoehorning in a black character to eclipse the white ones. Because we wouldn't want to show, we need to show the white guys getting beat up by a black character. That's what they would be telling you. However, when it was a white character, when he's portrayed as a white character, not one voice of dissent to say, hey, wait a minute, how are we shoehorning in this white guy? But then again, as I said, that's how racism works. It is selectively nearsighted. It protects a specific white racist perspective. It protects it. It hoards it. It's super hyper vigilant about making sure that nothing infringes on it. If Batman is going to lose, it must be to another white man. If Peter Parker, Spider-Man, is going to lose, it must be to another white man. You can't lose to a black person. You can't do that. Because in their minds, that destroys the validity of the character. So you can't lose to a black person. Bucky Barnes in Captain America, he couldn't lose to Black Panther. We got to interrupt the fight. These are the same guys that will tell you on video games like Battlefield and whatnot that they need to be realistic. Well, in the real world, black fighters are the dominant fighters on the planet. The dominant athletes. But when they go to their movies, all of a sudden they don't want black people to be the dominant anything. Certainly not physically dominant. The whites are physically dominant in the make-believe world. But if this is about reality, wouldn't black folk be the most physically dominant across the board? If we're going to reflect reality, if we're going to reflect statistics, if we're talking about numbers in the real world, then why aren't you demanding that the movies reflect reality statistically? If this is about Wakanda being in Africa and you don't believe such a place could exist in Africa, okay, then fine. Among your superheroes, the majority of them, the ones who are most physically adept and physically skilled, all of them, not most, not some, every single one of those should be a black male. And among the females, they should be black females. If you want it to be grounded in reality in some way, if that's your objection is, well, there's no place like that in the real world. Well, there are no white people like that in the real world either. All those people are black. Simone Biles, Usain Bolt. When you talk about your best and greatest when it comes to physicality and being physical geniuses, there's not a white person on that list. They're all black. Roy Jones Jr., Mike Tyson, Muhammad Ali, they're all ALL. Every single one is black. So when you show a white character and portray them as being physically dominant, that is shoehorning. But you don't hear black people complaining about it. You don't hear black people up in arms about it. At most, what you hear is, okay, why is it that that's a make-believe portrayal? We understand that's in no way connected to the real world. Shouldn't there be a little reality in there? Shouldn't there be a little reality? Because if there are no black people involved and you're showing all these people doing these super physical things, that's a break from reality. That's got absolutely nothing to do with the real world. All of a sudden, nobody's interested in reality anymore. Kind of interesting how that works, isn't it? The same people who claim they want reality don't want it anymore. The same people who claim that they're against social agendas, yeah, they're against social agendas unless it promotes and protects white male power and white male image. Then all of a sudden, they don't want anything but a social agenda. And what I've given you all tonight is the proof positive. Ask these guys, by the way, while you're complaining about the presence of black characters, quote, being shoehorned in, why is it you haven't given us a commentary about these white characters being shoehorned in? Why is it you've had no objections about those? Can you make a few videos and a few commentaries saying it? And by the way, they're right. We've never addressed this before, but let me take a moment to address this absolutely ludicrous practice of elevating white characters and shoehorning them in because they're white. For the white characters, they try to give you some objective analysis, but they're when it comes to black characters, the problem is you're black. With the white characters, it's a problem of storytelling, but with black characters, it's a problem that you are black. Your skin color is the objection that they have. Not the story that they're telling with you, but the fact that they're telling that story with a black character. That's the objection. So when I see these guys who promote these white supremacist ideals and these white supremacist perspectives and these white supremacist notions, repackaging them, and then I see them come over to Dave Chappelle special and attaboy and applauding it and whatnot, I know you're trying to hijack it and you're trying to take it down white supremacist boulevard. You also think you're going to come back later and say, I love Dave Chappelle. No, you never talked about him before now. You just love the fact that you think you found something that you can hijack to promote your agenda of white supremacy, of sanitizing the media on white supremacist credentials. You're going to cherry pick out the parts that he said that serve your interests, and then you're going to try to promote everything else. You're going to subdue everything else and just cherry pick out the parts you like, but you want to get rid of everything else. That's the game you're playing. We'll just keep the parts we want and get rid of everything else. And you think that this comedy special has given you a vehicle with which you can do that. Well, I'm here to tell you, we see it for what it is. And that's not going to work either. The fact that Rotten Tomatoes got it dead wrong doesn't make you right. It doesn't make where you're trying to go with it right. Because what you're trying to say is, you see, the critics were dead wrong about Dave Chappelle and out of touch with what the fans really think and what the fans really want. Then you're going to try to say, and you see, when they try to shoehorn in black characters, they're trying to please the critics, but they're out of touch with what the fans want, even if Rotten Tomatoes score refutes what you say in that instance. So it's very clear what you're trying to do. You're trying to hijack the narrative of what happened with Dave Chappelle's Sticks and Stones, and you think you're going to transport that rationale and that explanation over to promote your white supremacist agenda. But I made this video so that it can be established firmly. We see what you're doing. The white supremacists on the left and the white supremacists on the right. We see what you're all doing. You are all trying to promote a similar agenda. You are taking both sides of the argument. You're taking a look at everything that exists and seeing how you can try to manipulate it and fold it to promote your specific agenda. But let's be very, very clear. You have nothing for black people. You don't care anything for black people. Black people are a problem to be final solutioned in your minds. And you are not fans of Dave Chappelle. You just think that you have identified a way in which you can take advantage of and exploit Dave Chappelle's special to help yourselves. Not going to happen. Not going to occur, because you see, you're eventually going to have to come around and start telling the truth. Again. And most of you have already gone back to doing that. And the very next time that a black character is brought up and isn't subservient, you're going to let your white supremacist bona fides come out, and you're going to start saying what you were saying before. And you think you're going to hide behind your support for Dave Chappelle. That's not going to work for you either. White supremacy takes both sides of an argument. White supremacy tries to use any tool that it can. White supremacy tries to identify any opening that it can get its hands on. And you're trying to do that here. But you got caught. And you'll continue to be caught. You're the bad guys. You think you're going to rewrite things, but you won't. We're going to make sure that it's clear that everyone remembers that what you're doing That's the way that racism works. Now you're all up to code and up to speed. And this concludes tonight's broadcast of the BlackChannel.net radio program. I am your host, your brother, your humble servant, the Black Authority. And until next time, my brothers and my sisters from around the world, remember, black is the future, and the future is uncompromising.